Cold, hungry, sick, and utterly exhausted, with nothing more than a threadbare blanket to shield them from the frigid wind. These were the grim conditions of December 1776. The place is McConkey's Ferry, Pennsylvania. Washington's forces number a mere 5,000 troops, many facing enlistments about to expire. To say the situation is bleak is an obvious understatement. Absolutely no one would prefer this tired group of tattered teens over the tremendous might of the British Empire, its vast professional army, and brutal German mercenaries. And yet, Washington triumphed. Historians love to discuss the why of the American Revolution, why we went to war with Great Britain, and why freedom was so important in the first place. But what often gets forgotten is the how of the American Revolution, how we won the war, how a ragtag group of colonies triumphed against all odds. I believe it was three unique American values that defined the newborn nation and enabled us to prevail. These values remain just as important today in our fight against the deadly coronavirus as they were 2.5 centuries ago in our fight against Great Britain. The first American value was demonstrated by Jonathan Harrington, who awoke early one morning, kissed his frightened wife goodbye, and rushed to join the Minutemen at Lexington and Concord. Thousands of men, just like Harrington, boldly rejected their lives of comfort for the sake of the newborn nation, risking it all to help the cause. Harrington would later crawl back home, mortally wounded, only to die at his wife's feet. He gave the ultimate sacrifice for a better future which he would never get to enjoy himself. From Harrington, we draw the first American value of selfless dedication. The second American value was demonstrated by our victory at the Battle of Yorktown. No singular unit or division could have defeated the British, but united, the forces of Washington, Rochambeau, and de Grasse were able to successfully surround and trap Cornwallis' army, effectively ending the war. No singular colony had the military might to even contest Great Britain, but united, the 13 colonies, with the help of the French, were able to mask their weaknesses and double down on their strengths. This unity extends beyond just the field of battle. This war wasn't just a soldier's war. It required the involvement of everyone, including many women. Esther Reed of Philadelphia raised over $300,000 to purchase shirts and other supplies for the Continental Army. Sarah Osborne Benjamin traveled all the way from her hometown in Albany, New York, to Yorktown to deliver much-needed food to the troops. These are just two of the countless forgotten behind-the-scenes heroes of the American Revolution, those who didn't carry a gun, but provided critical funds and supplies that sustained the Continental Army. From both the coordination of forces at Yorktown and the contributions of Esther Reed and Sarah Osborne Benjamin, we draw the second American value of unbreakable unity. The final American value was demonstrated by Washington's forces at Valley Forge. There, the Continental Army resided in freezing conditions with virtually non-existent supplies for 6 long months. It's easy to understand why those who gave up did so. They had faced tremendous hardship and simply could not take any more. But what's more remarkable is how many more men stuck with Washington through the brutal winter months, ensuring that Washington's forces would fight another day. The Patriots demonstrated the incredible ability to withstand unbelievable hardship. From Washington's forces at Valley Forge who endured, we draw the final American value of unstoppable determination. Together, selfless dedication, unbreakable unity, and unstoppable determination were the values that defined the American spirit and enabled us to prevail against all odds. Together, these values were not only how we won the war against Great Britain, but will also be how we will win in our fight against a deadly coronavirus. We see selfless dedication in the millions of doctors, nurses, hospital workers, and EMTs helping their patients on the front lines while putting themselves at risk. We see unbreakable unity in the California governor sending thousands of surplus ventilators to New York, the epicenter of the crisis in America. Not only that, we also see unbreakable unity in the countless behind-the-scenes acts of ordinary Americans, raising money for local food banks and charities, delivering groceries to the elderly, and making homemade masks to flatten the curve. And finally, we see unstoppable determination in each one of us who continues to go to work or attend school from home. Just as our ancestors endured at Valley Forge and McConkey's Ferry, we, too, must never give up, never lose hope, and never lose sight of the three American values of selfless dedication, unbreakable unity, and unstoppable determination. Thank you.
The American colonies shocked the world to become a great nation of free men and women. Not only free from the tyrannies of a monarch, but also free from the birthright-based hierarchies that had dominated the world to that point. In America, it would be about who could get the job done, not what the value of your family crest was. The American triumph that enabled this had many great heroes that certainly would have been zeros without this new system based on merit and opportunity. On January 29th of the year 1737, a boy named Tom was born in Thetford, England, to a simple tailor and his wife. Though you wouldn't know it at the time, he would go on to become one of these great heroes. You see, nothing about him seemed particularly special. His education was meager, really just enough to be able to read and write and do a bit of arithmetic. His life after school continued on this unremarkable path. He had 2 short marriages, and he never seemed to be able to settle on a career, as he was either unsuccessful or unhappy with every job he took. He was pretty much a failure. Until one day, while in London, he met a man named Benjamin Franklin, and it would change his life forever. You see, Franklin convinced Tom to seek his fortune in America, and he even gave him a few letters of introduction, including one to his son-in-law, Richard Bach. Tom arrived in Philadelphia on November 30th, 1774, and before long, Bach had introduced him to a man named Robert Aitken, whose Pennsylvania magazine Tom helped found and edit for 18 months. By now you may know who I'm talking about. His full name was Thomas Paine, and he was not yet that famous patriot who inspired the greatest uprising the world would ever know. You see, Paine had arrived in America just as the great conflict that would sever British rule was threatening to break out into war. Thomas soon fell in love with his new country and instantly understood what was at stake. The problem was, not all Americans saw what he saw, and therefore were less passionate about fighting for change. Many colonial leaders saw the problem as only a struggle against the corrupt parliament, but still had much respect for the king, and most colonists were raised with the same belief. Plus, inclusion in the British Empire still had its benefits. For example, the colonies enjoyed the protection of the world's strongest navy and one of the world's best armies. With the British Navy protecting American shores, there was no fear of attack from some other European country. The British Navy also extended its protection to American shipping, which could sail the oceans in peace while flying the British flag. All of these reasons and more meant that though the colonists were tired of the way they were being treated, many were still on the fence regarding complete independence. This is where Thomas Paine found his moment and took it. He wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense, whose fiery inspiration, practical logic, and brilliant outrage made it an instant bestseller. It was published on January of 1776, and within just a few short months, it had sold over 500,000 copies all across the colonies. In this pamphlet, Paine argued passionately for two main positions. First, total independence from Britain, and second, the creation of a democratic republic. His arguments were eloquent and inspiring, while at the same time simple and straightforward. Thomas Paine put words to concepts only beginning to blossom in men's heads when he said that men who look upon themselves born to reign and others to obey soon grow insolent. Selected from the rest of mankind, their minds are early poisoned by importance, and the world they act in differs so materially from the world at large that they have but little opportunity of knowing its true interests. The colonists had suffered the consequences of this reality, and were now ready for the rallying cry that Thomas Paine provided that would be so instrumental in the fight for independence. America is indeed a nation, founded on the principles of common sense and the idea that all men who meet opportunity with effort should be afforded the fruits of their labor, and that the best of us are the ones we should choose to lead. This great country of ours was built on the free articulation of brilliant men like Thomas Paine, whose worthiness to be heard was based solely on the content of his message. It is this meritocracy that makes us who we are and who we must fight to remain. Thomas Paine knew this, and he wrote this, and he inspired a people to be willing to fight, to build a nation the likes of which the world has never seen. How vital was his role in America's independence? Well, according to John Adams, without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been wielded in vain. Thank you.
It is the night of July 1st, 1776, and a thunderstorm is raging. Oblivious to the sheets of rain, a man sits at his desk, diligently responding to reports of loyalist insurrections within his colony. But amidst the terrific cracks of thunder comes a knock. Startled, the man rushes to the door and is greeted with an urgent message. With no time to lose, he quickly readies his horse and is off, racing to deliver word that will define the course of America's fight for independence. As children, we all listened intently to the tale of Paul Revere's midnight ride. But that is not the story you shall hear today. For the man racing off in the pouring rain is not Paul Revere, bearing word of the British advance to Lexington. Rather, he is Delaware colonial delegate Caesar Rodney, and making haste atop his galloping steed, he carries not a warning, but a vote. You see, in many ways, history is a judge that determines a select few names, events, and ideas that shall stand the test of time. Its consideration of the American Revolution is no different. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere. These are the names that have become ingrained in our country's fundamental identity. Names that every American can identify and connect with. Yet, on the quieter side of history stand many more heroes whose unique contributions to the patriot cause are often forgotten. As citizens, it is our duty as well as our privilege to immerse ourselves in their stories. By doing so, we can gain a greater appreciation for our country's past, preserve the lives of our ancestors, and most importantly, remember that every citizen has a unique responsibility in upholding the legacy of our great nation. On the night that I have just described, the fate of the early revolution hung in the balance. In Philadelphia, a vote for independence had just been cast, but only 9 of the 13 colonies had pledged their support, and the Continental Congress did not wish to proceed without a unanimous consensus. Delaware was one of the 4 colonies that had failed to approve the motion. Its 2 delegates in attendance, George Reed and Thomas McKean, were split, and Caesar Rodney, Delaware's 3rd delegate, was 80 miles away from Philadelphia, dealing with loyalist discontent. However, Delegate McKean knew that Rodney was in favor of independence, and when the Congress elected to hold a second vote the following day, he sent a messenger to alert Rodney to the necessity of his presence. The rest, as we say, is history. Despite suffering from asthma and cancer, Rodney made the perilous journey through lightning and rain and arrived in Philadelphia on the morning of July 2nd in his boots and spurs, just in time to deliver the crucial vote. Motivated by his heroism, the remaining colonies followed suit, and the vote for independence passed unanimously. 10, 20, or even 30 years from now, I hope that we may all recall the story of Caesar Rodney's midnight ride as we relive the American Revolution with our children and grandchildren. However, let us not forget that the impacts of men like Rodney extended much further than through the story of a single night. In 1765, Caesar Rodney became a delegate to the Stamp Act Congress and was elected chairman of his colony's Committee of Correspondence, marking his true entrance into the forefront of national politics. We often remember George Washington as a leader who expertly united military control and bureaucratic efficiency, but Rodney proved equally talented. Beginning in 1774, Caesar Rodney served as both Major General of the Delaware Militia and representative to the Continental Congress. A brilliant logistician, Rodney and men like him made our success in fighting against the British possible. Consider George Washington's historic crossing of the Delaware River to launch a surprise attack at Trenton. Each and every soldier that participated in that legendary event had to be recruited from an individual colony. He had to stay clothed, fed, and armed during his service. He had to be paid. History often neglects the logistics that go into every military accomplishment, but without superb organization, many would have failed. For his own part, Caesar Rodney maintained communication with General Washington throughout the war and always ensured the Delaware met or exceeded quotas. Often paying for troop supplies out of his own pocket, Rodney's dedication to our country's struggle for independence never wavered, not even after he was voted out of Delaware's Congress by pro-British loyalists, angry at his historic vote on July 2nd, 1776. In our modern age, and at this current time more than ever, uniting a sense of political responsibility and organizational ability is critical. People often wonder, what can we learn from the American Revolution, from men and women who lived nearly 250 years ago? To them, I say, look to Caesar Rodney. Look to the man who defied cancer, who won the vote for independence, and who helped orchestrate the American Revolution. I am proud to say that I'm a relative of General Rodney, and as a true son of the American Revolution, I am invigorated. New challenges and new battles will confront us, but like our forefathers, we will always rise to the occasion and conquer them. Thank you.
The year was 1864. Reverend Elias Hillard, a congregational minister, embarked on a mission to preserve the legacy of Revolutionary War veterans. The War of Independence had ended when British General Charles Cornwallis surrendered to the Continental Army at Yorktown. Now, 83 years later, Reverend Hillard's mission was to visit the remaining Revolutionary War soldiers, to record their stories of America's fight for independence. Thankfully, through the work of Reverend Hillard, the stories of these remarkable men live on. So today, in an effort to preserve the legacy of Revolutionary War veterans, we will meet these brave heroes and learn from their example, from Revolutionary War to modern day. So who were the veterans of the Revolutionary War? Well, though an estimated 230,000 soldiers served in the Continental Army, very few first-hand accounts have survived the test of time. However, due to the work of Reverend Hillard, we are fortunate to have 6 first-hand accounts from Revolutionary War soldiers. In his book, The Last Men of the Revolution, Reverend Hillard introduces them as Alexander Milliner from Quebec, who fondly recalled General George Washington calling him his boy; Samuel Downing from Massachusetts, who fought in the decisive Battle of Saratoga; Reverend Daniel Waldo from Connecticut, who later served as chaplain of the United States House of Representatives; William Hutchings from Maine, who enlisted at the young age of 15; Adam Link from Maryland, who served 3 tours of duty in the Pennsylvania militia; and Lemuel Cook, the oldest survivor of the Revolutionary War, who lived to be 105. In his interview with Reverend Hillard, Lemuel Cook recalled his experience in the final battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Yorktown, saying, quote, "We had little to eat and nothing to drink under heaven," end quote. A letter from General George Washington further describes the hardships Revolutionary War soldiers faced, saying, quote, "To see men without clothing to cover their nakedness, without blankets to lay on, without shoes by which their marches might be traced by the blood from their feet, marching through frost and snow, and almost as often without provisions as with, and submitting to it without a murmur, is a mark of patience and obedience, which in my opinion can scarce be paralleled," end quote. From the accounts of both Lemuel Cook and George Washington, we are given a glimpse at the hardships Revolutionary War soldiers faced. But why are their stories important? What could the veterans who served our country so long ago teach us in this modern day? Well, to answer that question, it is important we remember what our soldiers fought and died for. They were not fighting for a king or even a country, but rather freedom, something we so easily take for granted. Those who fought in the Revolutionary War experienced firsthand the tyrannical rule of a monarch, starving the people of their inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because of this, many felt an intense hunger for freedom that only those who've experienced the starvation of tyranny can understand. At the time of the Revolutionary War, freedom of religion, speech, and the press, fundamental rights we now take for granted, were nothing but ideals for which brave men were willing to die. Today, due to the courage and sacrifice of American veterans, many have never experienced the starvation of tyranny. Unfortunately, if not careful, we become apathetic and take for granted the freedom that so many have given their lives to protect. Founding Father Thomas Jefferson once said, quote, "Freedom is lost gradually from an uninterested, uninformed, and uninvolved people," end quote. If there is one thing we learn from Revolutionary War veterans, it is that apathy is the enemy of freedom. In a letter to his wife Abigail, John Adams once wrote, quote, "You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it," end quote. Though we may never fully understand the immense sacrifice made by Revolutionary War veterans, the accounts preserved by Reverend Hillard give us a glimpse at the hardships they endured so that generations to come would be free. Now it is our duty to learn from their example, reject apathy, and live instead as interested, informed, and involved citizens. On his quest to preserve the legacy of Revolutionary War veterans, Reverend Hillard once said, quote, "History lives in those who created it. Our own are the last eyes who will look on men who looked on Washington. Our ears the last who will hear the living voices of those who heard his words," end quote. Due to the tireless efforts of Reverend Hillard, we have the tremendous opportunity to learn from Revolutionary War veterans. Today, I challenge you to preserve freedom and follow in the footsteps of Reverend Hillard by preserving the extraordinary legacy of United States veterans, from the Revolutionary War to modern day. Thank you.
Scene 1. A little dark parlor in Boston. Guards standing at the door. Hazelrod, crusty crowbar, simple sapling, haydoll, and Hector mushroom. Simple. I know not what to think of these sad times. The people armed and all resolved to die ere they'll submit. Crusty crowbar. I too am almost sick of the parade of honors purchased at the price of peace. simple. Fond as I am of greatness and her charms, elated with the prospects of my rising name, pushed into place, a place I never expected. These words can be found in a story that helped change the course of history, a story which condemned colonial tyranny through satire, a story written by a person named Warren, Mercy Otis Warren, that is. Oftentimes, we only recognize women like Deborah Sampson and Molly Pitcher, or Martha Washington and Abigail Adams. While these women were certainly heroic and influential, they did so by choosing the roles of either a brave soldier or a supportive housewife. However, while doing research, I began to wonder whether there was more to be told of the women of the Revolution. Maybe there were women who chose something other than the front lines or the sidelines. And I soon found the answer to this question in Mercy Otis Warren and Hannah Arnett. Mercy Warren took the situations life gave her and used them to accomplish great things. The early 1700s provided women with few opportunities for education. However, Mercy, an exceptional person from girlhood, convinced her brother's tutor to let her study alongside him. This brother would eventually become the famous figure James Otis. As an adult, she married another future revolutionary, James Warren, placing her in an influential political circle. Outraged after British officials brutally beat her brother, she decided to enter the realm of political affairs. In 1769, she began holding meetings in her home that evolved into the creation of the Committees of Correspondence, an organization which provided crucial leadership both during and after the war. However, her greatest contributions began when she published her stories in a Boston newspaper. Because the government banned direct forms of opposition, she concealed the tyrants' identities through satire, while opening the people's eyes to oppression, awakening their hearts for freedom, and raising their muskets for war. Today, historians consider her writings some of the most influential of the time, and her work a major contribution to America. Our next heroine, Hannah Arnett, is in many ways the opposite of Mercy Warren. From the little we know of her, she lived in a small social sphere, was mostly uneducated, and hardly recognized during her life. However, these two women have one important thing in common: the use of their patriotic spirit. One winter day, in the Arnett's home in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, Mr. Arnett held a meeting with his fellow men. The war had just begun, and it was time to side with either England or America. Eavesdropping at the door, Hannah overheard that the men planned to declare their loyalty to England to protect their life and property. Infuriated, she burst through the door, declaring them all traitors and cowards. When her husband attempted to silence her, she threatened to leave him if he sided with the British. The men, now ashamed of their cowardice, agreed to join America in the fight for freedom. So, while she never became the wife of a prominent patriot or served on the battlefields, she used the influence that she did have to rally the American cause. While today women face very few of the obstacles that Mercy and Hannah did, there's still something we can all learn from them, regardless of our gender. We don't have to play a certain role in order to make America a better place if we only do what we can with what we have. Mercy began simply by educating herself, then holding meetings, and then writing stories, and yet it grew into something incredible. To many, Hannah was a simple housewife, but she rallied the cause for freedom in one of the most important places, the home. Great deeds aren't meant just for soldiers or senators, court justices or first ladies. They are for parents, teachers, speakers, and artists. They are for doctors, chefs, lawyers, mechanics, and builders. Most importantly, they are for you and me. You and I have the opportunity to make America a better place no matter what else we are called to do. So let's take a lesson from these two women and make the most of the opportunities life gives us. Because patriotism is a duty that belongs to everyone. Thank you.
"13 clocks were made to strike together, a perfection of mechanism which no artist had ever before effected." This description, written by John Adams in a letter to Hezekiah Niles, describes the wonder of the American Revolution. 13 colonies, whose inhabitants included many nationalities, religions, and cultures, set aside their differences and joined together in unity toward a common goal. This historic decision galvanized the American spirit and created a national identity that underpins our society even today. The Revolution taught us that common goals are conceived through adversity, give birth to unity, and allow us to accomplish even the seemingly impossible. The making of our new country was never without adversity, whether it was from nature, illness, conflicts with the Native Americans, or the English government. Yet, these hardships, rather than pronouncing defeat, served to strengthen the character and resolve of the colonists. When, in the wake of the French and Indian War, the nature and intent of England's government fundamentally changed from being absent and out of touch to tyrannical, the seeds of the Revolution were sown. From attempting to control the colony's trade, limiting westward expansion, imposing taxation, and disallowing the printing of money, to requiring the colonists to provide room and board to British soldiers, England pressed hard for submission, but instead created a unified rebellion. John Adams wrote that, quote, "The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the citizens," end quote. Indeed, the colonists' common goal of self-rule, though not yet unanimous, was conceived through adversity. Further, common goals give birth to unity. Historian and author Wilfred Maclay points out that the revolution was carried out by, quote, "imperfect individuals who had a mixture of motives," end quote. For some, the revolution was for economic freedom. For others, it was for political, moral, or ethical reasons. Yet, the common goal of self-rule overshadowed the individual motives and unified the colonists. Captain Levi Preston, a soldier who fought the British at Concord in 1775, was interviewed in 1843 about his role in the fight. He was asked if he fought due to the oppressions of the Stamp Act or the tea tax, to which he replied that he did not feel them. Next, the interviewer asked if his participation was due to his philosophical beliefs about the eternal principles of liberty. Instead, he said, no. Then what was the matter, the interviewer queried, and what did you mean by going to the fight? Captain Preston answered, young man, what we meant going after those redcoats was this. We always had governed ourselves, and we always meant to. They didn't mean that we should, quote. Unity flows from a common purpose. Finally, unity in a common goal allows us to accomplish even the seemingly impossible. The success of the American Revolution was extraordinary. That a minimally trained militia composed of farmers, merchants, and ordinary citizens could defeat the strongest standing army in the world amazed everyone. Yet, it was the unity of mind and heart that empowered the American victory over Britain. This unity of purpose still burns brightly in the hearts of Americans today, though it seems to take a season of adversity to bring it to the surface. The coronavirus pandemic is such that adversity. Though political tension in the United States has clearly escalated, our common goal of defeating the virus has brought about amazing stories of cooperation and unity that will serve to conquer this new enemy. Whitney Tilson, American investor and author, recently published an impassioned YouTube concerning his work with the Samaritan's Purse Field Hospital in New York City. A self-acclaimed non-religious liberal, Mr. Tilson is very clear that he is ideologically opposed to the beliefs of the Christian organization. Yet, he has spent 12 hours per day volunteering for them since they arrived at Central Park. He had this to say: "Out there, we are brothers in arms. These people are good people. They believe they are doing God's work, and I have witnessed with my own eyes for 12 hours a day that they are doing God's work, and I'm going to support them." Whitney Tilson and the Samaritan's Purse are an unlikely partnership, forged through adversity and working beautifully in unison to accomplish great things. The wonder of the American Revolution continues. Common goals, conceived through adversity, giving birth to unity, and allowing us to accomplish even the seemingly impossible. So today, and for all time, may 50 clocks strike together, a perfection of mechanism which no artist has ever before effected.